As another year of Exploration Radio draws to a close, it is time to look back on some of the valuable nuggets of industry wisdom our guests have unearthed for us. At the end of each episode, we ask our guests two questions. What is something that must die in our industry, and what is something that must live? That something can be a concept, an idea, a business practice, a mindset, anything. The answers have been many and varied, and they are always a valuable insight into our guests, their approach to life and business. This is part 4 of our Ideas a Must series. I'm your host Ahmad. Come join us and let's explore.
I am Thebaud. In short, I say TK. My job specifically is to recover diamonds from the concentrate. This is my hope every day, to find big diamonds. I think about that in the bus every day.
Eira Thomas, welcome to Exploration Radio.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
And so the first question is, what is something that you think needs to die in mining? Something that we need to get rid of our industry?
You did send me these questions. And we talked about before kind of inclusion and diversity. And I think that there is certainly a perception that mining is still very male dominated. I think that is changing. It's definitely been a bit slow, but I think it really is about continuing to watch that and push for that kind of transformation and trying to get more and more women into senior roles. I think we've done a good job in certain parts of the business, but there still is that challenge of the glass ceiling where you just don't see very many women executives now pushing into the excos. Sorry, I've got dogs jumping around in here right now, so that was probably not very good.
No, that's fine. That fits in well with our earlier discussion about your dog story, so that's perfect.
I honestly think the mining industry as a whole has gone through a pretty important transformation, not just in recent years, but I would say over the last 25 years that I've been really active in the business. I think at that time there really was this kind of view that the world had to catch up and recognize the importance of mining. I think that we quickly migrated to we as an industry need to modernize. We need to recognize that there are some uncomfortable legacies that exist within the mining industry, and we have to own those. So I think that's a big part of it, not passing the buck, but recognizing that the world has changed and we understand and know a lot more about impacts on the environment, and we understand, and know how to develop mining projects more responsibly with a longer view to, full cycle reclamation. So I think, that's been a big kind of evolution. And of course, in recent years, that's kind of migrated more into the social arena or the sustainability space in and around communities that are now very much key stakeholders and partners in the process.
Yep.
And into the, the realm of governance and inclusion and diversity. So I think our industry, has demonstrated that it's capable of changing, but we've still got a lot more work to do.
So there's a couple of points in there that I'll come back to. I'll circle back to. But first, conversely, what is something that we need to keep in mining at all costs? Something that's fundamental to our DNA that we shouldn't forget?
Well, I think every industry really has to be able to reflect on where they've been. I think it's really important to take the achievements of the past. Canada, for example, has been a great mining nation. This is a country that's been built on its development of its natural resources. And there's a lot of expertise that's been developed in this country, whether it be on the technical side around mineral exploration or engineering, or even on the financial side and the development of the Toronto Stock Exchange and the capital markets that finance early stage exploration. So I think there's a lot of really positive things. What we have to do is kind of marry that wealth of experience with a more innovative, forward-thinking agenda. And I think if we can do that, then we really have a very compelling combination where you modernized an industry that's got a strong future, especially as we think about the whole energy transformation. That's kind of the favorite buzzword around the industry.
That's right. But I mean, I think there are important points in the fact that we are a very energy intensive industry, and also the fact that the major cost of kind of the energy point of view is how do you get energy out to kind of the remote site where mines tend to be. That is a fundamental cost. So what does the world look like when, say, we start using another source of energy, which is maybe, say, a little bit more expensive, or you have to be a little bit more sustainable from the energy point of view? I think these are quite a big issues that we're going to have to address at some point.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's already happening, and again, it comes back to that decision making and that balance, right, between what you want to achieve as a society in terms of your cost of energy or your cost of resources that we use each and every day versus the potential energy or CO2 footprint associated with the production of those materials that we all are need and use and don't intend to give up, like our cell phones. That's and right. Our cars and basically everything we have in our lives today that we don't grow in our garden.
I mean, that's right. Yeah, like we've effectively become a consumer society. So it does mean that, it's not like we're going to go back to a 1800 lifestyle where everyone's growing their own food and you only live with what you need. So a lot of these things are going to have to be done in a sustainable world. And what does that world look like when the consumer wants to be more environmentally conscious and the industry has to kind of deliver a product that they're going to want to buy in that sense?
Yeah, and I think transparency has a lot to do with it. I mean, I think we need to be educating everyone about how and what we do and what the environmental cost associated with that is and what the benefits are. And I think that education is really important because the consumer has an important role to play, right? We are producing the products that the world is consuming on a daily basis. And if we do that in a transparent way, so it's very clear what the potential impacts of those developments are, then they're in a position to, be making those decisions and taking responsibility for those decisions, I think, too.
So, Eira, so you mentioned a little bit earlier, and I want to touch on this a little bit. You mentioned the concept that historically we were a very male-dominated industry, and you've obviously had quite a long career in this industry, and I think like somewhat uniquely about your career is the fact that you started quite early. And you've had this kind of long residency time in the industry. So do you care to comment a little bit how the industry has changed to allow someone like yourself, and particularly women, to stay in the industry around the time when, like people want to have families, people want to be a little bit more sedentary for all intents and purposes, and can't go, traveling around or can't do kind of the field time required for a lot of roles. So how have you kind of managed that challenge in your career?
Well, listen, I think businesses have to adapt. It's not only mining, but there are many industries and businesses that are feeling the same sorts of pressures. But for women in particular in the mining industry, that has been a definite challenge in the past of trying to find that appropriate work-life balance, and particularly when it comes to travel into remote areas. And, initially this was a problem for our high potential female leaders, but it also evolved to become a problem for our high potential young men as well, because increasingly they find themselves in relationships and having partners that, had careers that had to be managed as well. So there was no longer one partner, making the decision or agreeing to be the parent or spouse that would stay home so the other could go and fulfill their duties, in some high powered career. Increasingly, it's about balancing two high powered careers. And so I think that really necessitates necessitated, a different outlook. When I started in this business, you got told you were going off for 4 months and you were just happy to have a job, and you went off for 4 months and there was no deliberation.
That's right.
Today it's definitely, well, if I'm going to go for 2 or 3 weeks, then I've got to balance that off against, 2 weeks back in the city. So my spouse can manage that through their own job priorities. And these are not easy things for sure. But I think given the way that we have embraced technology in recent years, and certainly through this COVID period, we've come to really understand that, we can get business done remotely, and that you don't always have to be there in person. And I think that part has helped. And I think this sort of view that you can take, periodic timeouts from your busy day job and still come back in and not having lost your sort of place in line, if you like. I think that was a big fear for a lot of career women that wanted to go off and have a child and worried about going on maternity leave and basically forfeiting, a lot of their future career potential. So I think employers are more sensitized to this. I think they now understand that there's a real value in working with their high potential leaders to incorporate these important personal aspirations and ambitions, because if you want to get the most out of that employee, then you've got to work to accommodate the other important kind of aspirations and their life work balance equation.
That's right. I mean, I think there's a couple of points you made which I think are quite interesting. Like when I kind of look at this problem, and I know this is something that the industry talks about a lot, like one of the things I kind of think about is, for a large part, we are a very technical industry. And if you take any technical job, and if someone spends a couple of years out of a technical field, what you really need to look at is how much that technical field changes in that time. So if you took a 6-month break, you might be ancient by the time you come back because of the way things have developed. And I guess, like structurally, I kind of always saw this problem in that, not just women, but if men wanted to take time out, and you made this great point, like I will put myself as that example. Like there came a point where being on the road 300 days of the year wasn't appealing to me anymore. And so that kind of narrows the type of roles that you can probably go for in that particular part of your career as well. So I always think that there's a bit of a structural problem in the fact that, if you are a technical industry and if you don't create other technical avenues where, someone can step away for a couple of years, to take care of whatever personal stuff they want to take care of, and then come back and don't feel like they are way behind the wave, and then now feel that, their career progression is going to be hampered by that time out. And I don't think we've quite, it's only recently, I think, that we've kind of started addressing the problem in that sense, rather than, we just got to find people that are happy to travel 300 days on the road.
That's right. I mean, you have to find different ways to achieve the same outcome, and it doesn't mean that it has to mean 300 days on the road like it perhaps used to. It doesn't mean that you don't have a certain amount of travel that needs to be accommodated. That obviously has to happen, but I think there is just a much greater willingness by senior leaders and boards to try and accommodate, the needs of their high potential people. And I think that's been a big evolution in the mining industry. I think when I first started in this business, things were just the way they were. Mining was a rough business. Mining business was, in many situations, an unsafe business where, this just comes with the territory. This is just the way it's done. And we have to accept that there's a certain amount of risk in this kind of business. I think we've evolved to the point now where, the culture of the mining industry is vastly different. Safety is a priority. No fatality is acceptable.
That's right. Yeah. And that's been a massive shift, I think, from what, the way things used to be done in kind of the 80s and the 90s, or, that era where, this type of risk was known, but, yeah, like you wouldn't put any resources or anything behind to kind of change that. Yeah, it was just like, it is what it is, and we'll just work with it.
Yeah, no, and I think there's been just a huge shift in attitude. It's kind of an industry that is, used to pride itself on being able to, bootstrap anything, and the tenacious people that could go into remote places and difficult places and create value for shareholders. And in this industry, the people themselves are very resourceful to, I think a more mature culture now where, sure, all of that is still very characteristic of our industry. But now we know that there are better ways to run these operations, safer ways to run these operations, more productive ways to run these operations, and that it doesn't have to be a completely male-dominated agenda. We have, for example, at Lucara, we are 85% female in our executive team. The managing director of our mine in Botswana is a woman. We have female truck drivers in the pit. These are all things that 20 years ago would be extraordinary. And they're still unusual today, but they are not nearly as rare an occurrence to see women, working, in the mine, running dozers and trucks and actually active at that level. So I think that's a real plus and a real positive, but we've still got a long way to go.
One of the things I find interesting is, while I was doing the research for you, there was a lot of mentions on the fact that, a lot of your accomplishments are regarded as, I think, accomplishments because you are a woman that has succeeded in this industry. Do you think that, we're getting to a point where we can be a little bit more gender agnostic when we talk about people's achievements? And I guess I'm asking your personal perspective in the fact that, like how people view you, or like the type of, say, criticism or plaudits you get when you kind of take different roles. I guess the view that people take on your career is changing in that sense.
I certainly hope so. I have always believed in a meritocracy. I think that being a woman in mining has had as many advantages as disadvantages, for sure. I think that there is a lot of people that, along the way for me, that have been real cheerleaders and supporters and mentors and really encouraged me. And then there are others, as you pointed out, that kind of look at it as, the fact that I'm an anomaly, being a woman in this industry that's really garnered most of the attention. So, I've always felt, ever since I started my career, that whatever potential bias you encounter in your job or in your workplace can be overcome by just hunkering down and getting the job done. And I think that's something I've always prided myself in. Whether someone had a view that you couldn't do it as a woman and you demonstrate that you can, or you're here because you're a woman, and so my expectations are lower. And I think in both those situations, it just makes you want to work harder to make sure that you kind of disprove those myths or dispel those biases. And I think a lot of women feel that way.
I mean, I guess it's the second point that you made that I find quite interesting, is that, like a lot of the rhetoric sometimes behind your achievements is, well, the achievements are impressive because if I put them in a smaller pool of only women in the industry, then it looks really impressive. And I feel like, like we sometimes have this stigma of kind of putting people in a smaller pool to say, like, yeah, they're impressive, but they're impressive because, they're only competing against whatever, a smaller pool. And like I guess I look at your career and you go, you stack your career against anyone, and I think it's quite impressive, the type of stuff you've done and the variability of stuff that you've done. And I guess it's like it's something that I find that like obviously there's a marketing piece that kind of goes behind this as well, for certain companies, but it's also the fact that as an industry, maybe we should move past the fact that we just kind of look at, like you said, based on people's merits and judge their performance based on that, rather than always trying to pigeonhole people into a smaller population and saying, whether they're impressive or not based on that.
Yeah, listen, I really would never want to be compared to, just my gender. That just seems ridiculous to me. At the end of the day, I am running a company that has a broad group of stakeholders, including shareholders, and my job is to make money for them. And that, at the end of the day, is a real test of my success. And I think it's as simple as that. Yes, I've had some really interesting opportunities throughout my career, and I've done a lot of incredible things and had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of amazing projects. And I don't think any of it is diminished because of my gender. I think these are all experiences that really have no relation to my gender, I guess. At the end of the day, as I said, the bottom line for me is that in any project I've taken on or any new challenge, it's really been about, measuring, success on the basis of whether I'm actually doing better for my stakeholders and shareholders.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, ultimately, that's the real test of whether you are successful in what you do or not. I mean, if you'd had a track record where you lost a lot of money for shareholders, I'm sure the opportunities that you would be provided beyond that point would be diminished to some degree. You are getting the opportunities you're getting because of your track record of having done things previously. Yeah, I only asked that question because there was one interview that I read where I think, you made some pointed comments around the fact that you were sometimes questioned by investors when you've taken certain roles, whether whether the company needed to hire someone a little bit more capable to kind of run the certain company or the certain role.
No, absolutely. I've definitely found that, where I have encountered, well, you're not a mining engineer. What do you think you know about building an underground mine? Well, the same question posed to a male mining executive who'd been in the career for 35 years and been involved in a number of successful developments would never be asked that question. And I would point out that there are many men in this industry that have had spectacular failures and lost their shareholders a lot of money and gone on to be, seated by a headhunter in an impressive job the next time around. I would say the likelihood of a woman doing that is extremely low.
Completely agree.
And that point I would say there's many lives for some of my counterparts, I would say. And it's also a testament to the pool, the talent pool right now in this industry is so tiny, right? I always used to laugh with some of my, my peers in the same age that have been in this industry now for more than 25 or 30 years that, we almost win by default because there's just so few young people, choosing a career in mining, and that too is a problem. We have to be able to attract the top talent if we're going to continue to grow this industry in a sustainable way. And that's really where my comment about, you can have spectacular failures and go on to, fight another fight and live another, day.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's companies and people that seem to pop up every boom, and and you kind of look at their track record and go, there's no reason why you would ever give them the keys again to a company. But I think it's a fantastic point you make is this kind of retention problem that we run into in kind of the mid-career part of a lot of people in our industry. If you don't fix that, the problem kind of manifests itself on the other side, on kind of the executive level, where but like you said, by default, some people are just getting roles because there isn't anyone else around.
Yeah, and listen, it's not that I don't believe that people don't deserve second chances. This is a tough business. You can have your sights on the prize, and you hit the cycle at the wrong time, or you didn't manage the share structure as well as it should have been, and suddenly you find yourself in a situation where you don't have healthy value creation, and so that does happen.
And sometimes these things are just out of your control. Stakeholders can change their mind. The market changes. Investors kind of lose confidence in something. Sometimes there are just external factors that kind of railroad you in this process.
No, definitely. And I think that's why it's just so important to be able to, I think, learn from, all of those experiences, and hopefully you take them with you, and there isn't a single person, I don't believe, in this business that hasn't gone through some sort of trial or tribulation in this business, for all of those reasons. And I think the important thing is to kind of learn from that and try not to do that the next time. I'm sitting with a share price on an asset right now on a commodity that's very much out of favor, and it's half the value that it was 2 years ago, and yet the company has added significant resources to the bottom line and de-risked kind of the longer term growth strategy. And so that's disappointing, but it also fundamentally for the people that understand the value that's there and being created, it represents a huge opportunity. And so you have to turn those things into positives and recognize that by, I think, shepherding these assets along and through these cycles and doing the appropriate things as leaders and making sure that you're not basically sacrificing future value, that these assets will eventually come through that cycle, and then you're incredibly well positioned to hit the next wave. And that's, I think, something that this industry has done particularly well over many years of living through many mining cycles, and knowing when to take your foot off the gas and when to put your foot on the gas in order to get these projects through and into development in a way that's going to make money for shareholders and all the stakeholders is the real key.
Chuck Fipke is a breed unto himself, an explorer and innovator, a scientist and entrepreneur.
Chuck has the tenacity of a bulldog when he believes in something. And this is what basically I think has resulted in Chuck's success over the years.
Just about every geologist prospector knows what I'm talking about. It's, the find, hey? You want to discover, and that's what you were trained to do, and that's what you want to do, hey? You don't really do things for the money. You do it, to try and achieve that, find something, hey?
Chuck and his partner in Diomed Minerals, Stu Bluesen, discovered that De Beers was exploring at Blackwater Lake.
This discovery generated a staking rush in the Northwest Territories that was unprecedented in Canadian mining history. And huge amounts of money were raised and huge amounts of exploration were done as a consequence. And his lab, in my mind, has become one of the best in the world, actually, for this type of thing.
The equipment was all designed and built, hey, for concentrating, making concentrates of diamond indicator minerals. And so a lot of equipment you can't find anywhere else. I remember particularly this one time, this elder brought me in this little hut, and he was so proud. He had this grizzly piece of meat and with a little bone, and he took me and showed me. He thought it was so cool, And I once was with spent 3 weeks with Bushmen in the Kalahari Desert. And it was great fun, to track animals and see them how they lived in nature. I had this little car, and my mom used to get upset because I'd go down this hill at breakneck speed. I find I just don't have a lot of fear. I don't fear really anything. It's crazy, I should fear more.
He also supports a number of wildlife groups that are trying to preserve different kinds of wildlife around the world. As most people know, he does have a very vibrant group of competitive thoroughbred racehorses. In fact, one of them has won the Queen's Plate, and some others have won some serious stakes races around the world.
I started riding horses, when I was in high school. My first horse was really an Arab, and it was just a little yearling, and I broke it myself. I just started really liking horses.
And it takes a person that believes in what they're doing. and a person that wants to achieve something, a person that wants to find that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And Chuck is certainly that kind of person, there's no question. He's just as keen today as he was in the past.
Welcome to Exploration Radio, Chuck.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, welcome for you guys to come all the way from Perth to Toronto.
Yeah, we've been trying to get to PDAC for a while, so this is the first year that we've actually done it. So let's see how it goes. So there's two questions that we always ask our guests. So the first one is, what is something, it could be an idea, a concept, a behavior, that you think needs to die in mining, something we need to get rid of out of our industry?
Well, you see, I think, finding a mine, hey, yeah, you'll destroy an area, hey, like, 3 or 4 square kilometers, hey, you with me? Good. But with time, hey, you can bring that back, hey, you can bring it back to even better than it was, hey. It takes maybe a lot of time, but it occurs in nature anyway. I mean, I've seen places where there's old mines, hey, and it's everything's growing up, hey, and you could hardly see that the mine was there because it's all vegetated naturally, hey, without doing. So the thing is I think finding mines provides the revenue, hey, for schools, hospitals, the Department of Environment. And all these things, and the politicians, they take all this credit, hey, for doing this and that. But if they didn't have the mines and the revenue, hey, they wouldn't be very popular, hey. Yeah. You need that revenue. Hey?
So one last question, Chuck. If now looking back, if there's something that you could have done differently, what would it be?
Well, it's really, professionally, hey, for doing the mining, and I wouldn't want to do anything differently, hey, nothing. But I'm not going to get into my personal life, hey, but there are things, hey, I could have improved.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, the trouble is too is that in order to achieve something, hey, you really have to put a lot of effort into it, hey, and if
do you pay a price for that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you do. Hey, you don't have as much time with kids. Hey, there are some people, hey, that put all their time into their kids and sacrifice and that. But they're doing that and they can't achieve like I met this guy that had won 2 gold medals at the Beijing Olympics, and I said to him, well, what's the scoop? How come you won 2 gold medals? And he won the overall medal for gymnastics, eh? And then he won on the horse, the what do you call it? The vault.
Oh, yeah,
horse vault. Sort of thing. And he said that well, he had worked every day for like 9 years, I guess he said. Eh?
Yep.
And he had taken 28 days off because he was sick, eh? And he had to work in the mornings and the evenings continuously every day, hey? And he said the funny thing, he says, the thing that I didn't do, I was the worst at, was the vault, hey? And he said, but what happened is I got injured, and my injury was such that the only thing I could do was vaults. So for 6 months, I did the vaults, and it became my worst thing to my best, and I got a gold medal. But you have to work really hard at things, hey?
Yeah.
And if you had got married and had a bunch of kids and stuff like that, he would never have gotten those gold medals. So the thing is you just got to balance. In order to achieve really good things, you really have to put a lot of work into it, and you can't do everything. Hey,
I mean, the conversation comes across as you've been really good at what you do, and that's why it got you there. You worked hard to get good to get there. Do you think you've been lucky in some way as well?
I really think hey, you make your own luck. Hey, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
That's the old Gary Player thing. That's great.
Oh, I was on his farm. He used to have he looked after some of my horses. Gary Player, he was a wonderful guy.
Wow.
Still is, I guess.
Well, I think that's as good a spot to end on. So
okay.
Thanks a lot for coming along, Chuck. This was great.
Okay, good.
So, Tony, welcome to Expression Radio.
Thank you for having me, Ahmad.
So the first one is, what is something that you think needs to die in mining? Something that we need to get rid of? I think I have a pretty good idea what you're going to say for this.
Yeah, which one do I pick? I think what needs to die in mining is the inauthenticity that can be at times rampant. And when I say inauthenticity, I mean, we talked about paid coverage, paid newsletter coverage, and then touting, that the company's this, or the inauthenticity, how you report your results, pretending or making it look better when it actually isn't. The inauthenticity, how you approach communities with this bias or inauthentic view on how it's going to look. At the end of the day, I do tell the communities, listen, we're not building a playground. It's a hole in the ground. I can't hide that. And then don't say that. No, this is what it is. But there's a place for metals. It's part of our lives. There's a need for it. And it can be done responsibly and ethically. And it can also be done in harmony with the environment to a certain extent. And if there's an opportunity with the locals to benefit that or play a role in that, it comes down to, again, do you want to be part of this? There's risks associated with everything. So you have to be comfortable with those risks. So that's kind of, I think, the inauthenticity, marketing, First Nations, local community engage, all those things I've said, I think what needs to die in our space.
Well said. So conversely, what is something that you think we need to maintain in mining at all costs? Something that's fundamental to our DNA and we shouldn't forget?
Well, I'm going to go with what first came into my mind, and that's integrity. I think, integrity spills over into accountability for when you miss on a drill hole, accountability when you have an oil or gas spill on your property, integrity to when you walk into an investment meeting and you say, this is truly independent research coverage, I didn't pay for that, or this is the transparency on our salaries, our options, or how we're compensated, or where we bought at. I would love to see more integrity, maintained and also improved in our space, because that's the foundation for just being a better human.
Excellent. That is an excellent point to end on. Thanks a lot for joining us, Tony. This was great.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate your time.
Our next speaker, I've got quite a resume here. He told me I could just introduce him as the dude from Tok that runs Doyon, but I'm going to he's quite an impressive resume, and he's going to have to suffer through me reading through it. Aaron Schutt is the president and CEO of Doyon Limited. He's responsible for the day-to-day business operations of the Doyon family of companies. He's worked at Doyon since 2006. Prior to being named president and CEO, he served as senior vice president and the chief operating officer from 2008 to 2011. He clerked for the Alaska Supreme Court Justice Alex Brinner after graduating from Stanford Law School. Prior to joining Doyon in 2006, Aaron was an attorney at the Anchorage offices of the national firms Sonosky Chambers, Soschke, Miller, Munson LLP, and Heller Ehrman LLP, where he represented tribal and ANCSA corporation interests in transactional and business matters. He's a Koyakan Athabaskan, was born in Anchorage, and yes, he is a dude from Tok. So, welcome, Aaron.
Welcome to Expression Radio, Aaron.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we always ask people two questions at the end. So the first one is, what is something that you think needs to die in mining? Something that you think we need to get rid of out of our industry?
I guess the one thing we see that's always present in our discussions is that flip at near end of mine life to some other company that has many fewer resources to do the reclamation and other work that needs to happen at the end. And you see it in oil and gas too. We don't really face that at Doyon because on our land we have our agreements with mining explorers and would let us prohibit that transaction. But I think that's something that you see in the industry that somehow we got to do a better job addressing it.
Do you mean the custodianship of the land that we've used and how we're actually going to do something with it afterwards?
Yeah, the reclamation liabilities that are often, oil and gas as well, all the resource industries, especially historically, they're not adequate and not well planned, and you flip it to the next company and they do less, and then they flip it to another company, and pretty soon there's like...
Yeah. So in saying that, one question I had is, how do you think we handle that handover between companies? Like if I think about, say, an exploration project, often it tends to be the case that, a junior company comes in and does the initial exploration. And then if it becomes something or a project at a certain scale, then that company is either going to get swallowed or the project is going to get swallowed by a bigger company. How do you find that handover? Because you might have maybe a more intimate relationship with a small company, but then when it gets handed to a bigger company, there is the potential for essentially things to be dropped along that process.
So we have a little more control in our agreements, a little bit more of a right to veto, so that we can make sure that the financial resources at least are there. If we get to that point, we don't have anything that's even close to that in time right now, but that's the legal agreements are pretty strict on that front.
Yeah, wow. That's an interesting way to kind of handle that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not saying that it's good or bad. I think, sometimes junior companies are not great at handling that relationship, and then they're giving this bag to a bigger company, with all of its problems. As an industry, I don't think we quite acknowledge how we should solve that. There is a potential for things to go wrong there. So the last question that we have is, conversely, what is something that you think needs to stay in mining and exploration, something that's fundamental to our DNA that we shouldn't forget?
Well, we really like the exploration because mining makes the world go, right? And so we need these resources, and they're out there, and that search for them is fun. Like, that's what we're trying to instill in a bunch of our young people, and a lot of our deals all require scholarships and training for our young people. And we like to see them get into the field and participate in that exploration so that they enjoy STEM careers. They spend time on our own lands looking for these various resources and hopefully make careers out of it.
Mm-hmm. Since you said that, can I ask a question? So you talk to local communities, so you're talking to the younger generation that's coming up. Do you think that they find some level of, maybe angst is not the right word, but some level of kind of trepidation about the fact that should they stay to a more kind of traditional living off the land kind of lifestyle, or do they go down the path of working in something like exploration and mining, where they I guess they're still tied to the land, but they're not necessarily, it's not the substance in that sense. Because this is something that I guess I've found in certain programs, is that you obviously want to hire as many, the younger generation, and kind of bring them up so they become more informed. But there's always this kind of conflict sometimes that's always been expressed to me from their side.
Yeah, there's that conflict, and some of it's education.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have anyone living a truly traditional lifestyle anymore. We all use modern implements. We want to upgrade our telecom systems. We like planes and boats, and most of our shareholders live in the city now. Most of our kids are growing up in the city. So that's another one. It's like we need to get an economic base in our rural part of our region so that our people can stay in our homelands and not migrate further and further away from them. So that's part of that education. Part of the education is how much science has progressed our industries, how much safer they are for individuals and the environment than they were just a few years ago. And the horror stories are usually quite old. And those were true of all industries, were much more dangerous than they are these days. So it's just one of those things that you got to spend time and you want to create opportunities for our people. That's what our thing is. We want to create opportunities for our people. So a number of them are going to be in the resource industry.
I guess, I just think from the company side, it's probably something we maybe not have utilized as much, because when you're going into places like Alaska, the people there really want that relationship with kind of the land. And I think, we could have done maybe a better job of, like you said, educating the younger generation. It doesn't necessarily just have to be the younger generation, but anyone in those communities, because working on kind of exploration projects, they still can have that relationship with the land in a slightly different way. But then it also gives them opportunities to and they can decide either they exercise the opportunity to stay there or, they exercise the opportunity to go work somewhere else. And I've always kind of felt that, maybe we could have done a better job of maybe pushing that a lot more, that rather than just like bringing expats from anywhere, investing the time in people that are in local communities. Yeah, like particularly geology. I mean, geology is a science of the land. So if you kind of pass that on to someone that already has a relationship to a land, that can only be kind of a positive thing if it allows them other opportunities along the line.
Great.
So that's it, Aaron. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Yeah.
This was a great conversation.
Really enjoyed it.
Hello, Wache. Bonjour. Je suis Charlie Angus, Député fédéral de Timmins Bay James. I am here today to talk about the attack that has been launched against public institution in Ontario. The dismantlement of Laurentian University is an act of national vandalism of the likes of which we've never seen. For people to understand how important Laurentian is, you have to really understand the 60 years that went into building that institution. It is the only public institution in the country with a mandate to support Francophone, Indigenous, and the working class Anglophone communities from the northern regions that never had access to education on the post-secondary level before. My father was a Laurentian graduate. He was never able to go to school because he was a son of a miner. He had to quit school at 16 and get a job. But Laurentian gave him an opportunity when he was an adult. He ended up becoming a professor of economics. That's not the only story. I know other people whose grandfathers worked at shifts at Inco and went to school at night and changed and became professionals.
Pete Betts, welcome to Exploration Radio.
Thanks, mate. Good to see you guys, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So the first question is, what is something that you think needs to die in our industry? It can be a concept, a behavior, anything that you want to jettison out.
All right. This is an on-the-spot question. I would like to see fewer websites with mines and Tonka trucks and people standing around in hard hats and orange vests.
Wearing yellow.
Yeah.
Or orange or whatever they're wearing.
I just feel like, we know what that is. The image has to be different. That's the first thing. So, and that's easy to do. Just put some different picture there. Anyway, so that's one. What's the second question?
All right. So second and last question. Oh, actually, there might be a question after this. But anyway, second question. What is something that you think needs to live in our industry? Something that's fundamental to our DNA that we should never forget?
I've got a fluffy answer for that to start with and then a real one. So I think geologists are amongst the most passionate people out there. They love it. That is a gift and also a curse. And so the gift is that we are super passionate about it, so we should be. And the curse is when we find our some of our peers who disagree with us, we get to engage with that disagreement and we forget why we love geology. So I would love to keep that passion about our discipline and the celebratory part of it, and we could kind of park our differences, I think. We kind of should be on the same page. And if we disagree, then let's keep it private, not public.
That's all right. Okay, here's another question. Do you remember that probably 10 or 14 years ago, you got a call from the Australian Immigration Department regarding a honours student? I just want to know, what did you say on that call?
That was you, wasn't it? I don't remember. I can't remember the call. But I will tell you. I remember going out into the field with you and a guy called Robin Ahmad during your honours years. We only took one CD with one song on it. And we had to listen to that one song for 2 weeks.
Yep.
Anyway, it was a song about a thylacine by
That's right.
artist Nick Barker. It's hilarious. Robert and I were laughing about that today. So, yeah, and I remember playing lots of ping pong with you in your lab, in your room when I was an academic. So
that's all right.
I was not doing any academic work.
But yeah, neither were you, so we were probably pretty good company for each other.
No, that's right. Yeah, that's right, exactly.
No, thanks a lot, Pete. This is great. This has been excellent.
It's been fun. Thank you. Cheers.
So something lighter. At the end of our interview, we always ask our guests 2 questions. So the first one is, what is something that you think needs to die in mining? It could be an idea, a concept, a behavior that you think we need to get rid of out of our industry. So you go ahead first, Justin.
Look, it might be a bit sort of cliche or topical or whatever, but misogyny, sexism in mining needs to go. We need to employ more people, women, and diversity. We need to provide an environment where they can work comfortably, and we can't lose them. There's so much talent, female talent in the industry that we lose for a whole variety of reasons.
Yep.
We've got to do better.
Cool. Great one. Kyle?
For me, it's kind of stemming out of my new role in business development, but it's kind of a geological bias towards bigger areas with this belt scale terrain, but I find it really, really confusing when you're chatting to people in our industry and talking about these bigger underexplored areas that have never seen contemporary exploration. When I mean contemporary exploration, like really deeper drilling, busting through the surface. And you kind of ask why they've never been explored, and it's there's no gold there, mineralisation models and analogues. But we proved that wrong time and time again. We did it at Yamana for a long time. There was the Yamana terrain and the Yamana and Dorothy Hills greenstone belts were never posed to hold a multi-million ounce resource, and we've proven that wrong. And Gold Road are trying to prove it wrong again, that it can hold more than one. Just whether it's within Australia or different areas of the world. But when it comes to gold exploration, the more someone tells you that an area that is underexplored is not prospective for gold, for me, that's a huge driver that it probably is actually pretty great, and someone needs to get in there and work. It's just that bias.
The bias in being model driven in certain areas?
Maybe model driven. Models and analogues are really important, but there is a point where you need to go and test it as well, when they become concrete fact.
Yeah.
And as geoscientists and particularly exploration geologists, those statements shouldn't carry much weighting until you've got some results to back it up.
That's all right. No, I think that's a good one. So the last question. So conversely, what is something that you think we should maintain in mining at all costs? Something that's fundamental to our DNA that we should never forget.
Curiosity. People need to be curious, and I think we're losing that. There's so much information available. There's just information overload and sensory overload, and I think it's quite easy for people to stop being curious about what they're looking at or what they're doing or what they're learning, and it's too easy to learn false information. There's so much out there, and Google and Wiki. Don't always trust what you read, but be curious about everything you see. And I think there's a lot of people out there and a lot of young geos that aren't quite as curious as they could be, and not questioning about what they see and thinking about it. It's something I've been trying to drive for the last probably 5 years, is just a drive for curiosity in what you're doing.
Do you think in kind of the big corporate cultures that we have, do you think it's possible to maintain that kind of curiosity and creativity, that ability for people to test themselves when we are becoming a lot more administrative in the way that we handle people and resources in companies?
It's much harder. It's definitely much harder. And I think in the bigger companies it becomes harder and harder still. I had a lot of conversations about this with sort of some of our general manager of capability and culture at Gold Road. We used to talk about this on a regular basis. Is how do we drive that curiosity?
Yep.
And stop it being stifled by process and system, which processing system very, very easily stifles curiosity and creativity if you're not careful.
Yeah, that's right. We become a little bit more about, like always trying to find, the square peg that has to go into that square hole. And I always think that, maybe I'll be interested in your perspective. So as a manager, do you think that you have to take on a little bit more in the fact that you have to figure out a way of having these kind of disparate people in your company, like Ziggy, or, do you have to accept that, they, like, for all intents and purposes, let's call these people a little bit of a pain in the ass to manage. Do you have to take on that responsibility as a manager to some degree?
Absolutely. And don't stifle it, I think, especially in geology needs creativity, and it needs to have some of the weird geos out there. It needs to have some of those weird minds, because they're the ones that are going to come up with the zany ideas which are going to amount to something.
That's right.
So you need to, as a manager and a leader, you need to ensure that you're creating and allowing diversity in the team and diversity of thought as well.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you start getting, if everyone's the same and it's just all group thought, you're not going to be successful in anything.
Yeah.
So embracing those creatives is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And being they're hard to manage, really hard to manage, but you've got to be prepared for that and put your hand up to manage it, and fight for them as well. Fight against the other forces in companies that might say, oh, they're a bit weird, or they're behaving badly, or they might be behaving badly. It might look bad, but it's not.
It's not malicious,
it's
so
not
it's
really
not
bad or malicious. It's just
it's just their personality.
Makeup of people. You need to have those people, and you need to manage them and fight for them.
That's a great point. All right, Kyle, what would you maintain in our industry?
This big innovation push. There's a lot of amazing work being done about different analytical techniques, machine learning, data learning, but what I'm really enjoying seeing is, and it kind of leads on to what you were both talking about then, is facilitating this creative time for geos and harnessing this curiosity or promoting it. And I want to see more. There's some great stuff being done, but driving further in innovation of management and geosystems. Now, that sounds really boring, but geology roles now, exploration or mining, the administration and reporting is becoming pretty crippling. And really, that time you get to have that creative time to just look over data, with no time frame, go and relog something. It's really starting to be whittled down by all these administrative responsibilities. I'd like to see innovation drive more kind of one-stop shop management and reporting systems. And look, there's a lot of people doing this stuff, so maybe I haven't seen it, but I think that would be a really great space to help facilitate that pure, unobstructive geology time.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point is fair in the fact that, in the world where we want to measure things, it's often hard, not often, it's almost always hard to measure the direct product or impact of creative time, because it's a non-linear process. It's not like if you spend an hour, then you're going to get an hour's worth of kind of product out of it. You might spend a week and get nothing, or you might spend an hour and get a lot. So there's this complete disparity in how that works. And in a measurable world where everyone wants to measure, did you make 10 widgets today? It's a pretty hard kind of thing to kind of create in that organization.
The modern exploration geologist can wear a lot of hats these days, and in a smaller company you can also be equal parts database and tenement management and reporting, and they're all great experience to learn and to know how to execute, and important to the business. But it's kind of funny when you map out what a day and a week might look like with your key responsibilities are measured and you do need to achieve for the business requirements. And then the things that you can't quantify their value, but we know from history and other discoveries that it's that time that you can't put a value on, it's unquantifiable, it's really important. And when that's being reduced in your data only a little bit, something's really wrong with that.
Yeah. So one last question, which we're kind of trying to ask people, is what's your greatest travel story? Is there a story that comes to mind first? You guys can go, whoever comes first.
You go, Justin.
Any travel?
Yeah, anything. Could be personal, could be work. Anything that you find, if I said, give me your best travel story, what are you going to lay out there?
Oh, God. I've traveled. I need to think about that one.
I can jump in with one while Ozzy's thinking. Just before I graduated mid-year at Curtin, which is kind of odd. I had a few units to finish off that I had the pleasure of redoing.
Yeah.
Not to mention structural geology. But it was
It's
fortuitous.
good that you work on a structurally hosted gold deposit then, so that's excellent.
We've got specialists for that now, fortunately. Great learning opportunity.
Yep.
But Curtin, for the first time, in conjunction with the Rio Tinto Centre and the director there, a Russian guy, Vladimir, had kind of partnered up this weird science kind of conference summit program in central Siberia in Tomsk.
Okay.
It's kind of focused on climate change affecting geomorphology in the Altai region.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there were just posters up around the different science department units, and you could apply to go over there and be part of this summit. Not being a geomorphologist or having some interest in sedimentology at least, I wrote a little abstract and a submission and somehow managed to fudge my way into a AGSO-funded student trip to central Siberia in summer, mind you, the beautiful month and a half of sun they get.
Yep.
And it was unreal. This university that was, I think the building was just a tad older than colonial Australia, hosted us for this kind of 2 days of translated conference.
Mm-hmm.
And then we spent a week kind of camping and travelling all the way down to the Russian Altai Mountains, in which the university, Tom State University, that hosts us, have a glacial research centre up there and a school of mountaineering. So if you're a university student, you can spend your university break learning to mountaineer.
Excellent.
So a pretty commonplace extracurricular activity for them.
I mean, what else would you do in central Siberia?
And I mean, just the whole trip up there, while we were on the main roads, we were just in a regular travel bus and these kind of amazing campsites by these rivers in these big glacial floodplains. But then it was going up to the mountain where it all changed. The bus parked in the middle of this huge flat grassy plain, and you could see the mountains and the glaciers behind us. And then parked there were 4 ex-Soviet Union Russian trucks. No seats, all us 20 students, some from Europe and the rest from Curtin, piled into the back of this just metal box. There was a small potbelly fire in the corner.
Yep.
And then started a 4-hour descent of this 8-cylinder diesel vodka-powered truck into the mountains. And it was a truck designed for driving, so there was no real road up there. They were just kind of winging it.
Yep.
And gee, did we felt it. I think everyone hit the roof at least half a dozen times. There were a few mild concussions and a few bleeding heads by the time we got up there.
On the plus side, you're not going to remember the drive anyway, so you'll be fine.
We'd also taken enough of Russia's finest little water, or the clear spirit to soothe our pain. But that was amazing. That was actually my first time overseas. Turned 22 in the mountains, and just a great group of people climbing up the glaciers every day, trying to converse with Russian geologists and geomorphologists, where there was just a 99% language barrier.
Mm-hmm.
But just lots of gesticulating about specimens. It was a time of our life.
Yeah, wow. Jeez.
Awesome.
Justin?
I've thought. So mine was probably 1993. We got married. So my wife was another geologist at WMC. Mm-hmm. We got married. We were lucky enough to get some leave without pay from WMC from Thebaud, and we went to Europe for a 3-month trip. And it was our first time overseas for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
She's Croatian background, so during that trip, we just drove around Europe. But during that trip, we went to visit her family in Croatia. So Croatia in 1993 was in the middle of the Yugoslav breaking up. It was in the middle of the war.
Yep.
So we went to visit her family in northern Croatia, up near the Hungarian border.
Mm-hmm.
It was the mother side of the family. We stayed with them for a few days, and then we were going to drive to see her uncle on her father's side, which was down on the islands in the Croatian Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
So we were told sort of, go this way, just sort of were given a rough route, and we just had it. In those days, there was no GPS, there was no, it was all paper maps.
Yep.
So we jumped in the car and we drove down to see her uncle. And on the way, we went through we were told, go around, don't go right into Karlovac, sort of go past this town. So we were driving along and past Zagreb and then down, and we started seeing sort of a bit of smoke around the place. And driving, what's going on here? I'm not sure how close to the warfront we are, but we were driving along, and then we started seeing trucks driving along with sort of army trucks and tanks on the back, and turned out we were probably about 10 kilometres from the warfront. We saw when we started seeing big convoys of trucks, we thought we better. So we drove around and further around, and we managed to get by that. But we were extraordinarily close to what was an active war front at the time. We had no idea.
Yeah, this sounds like the plotline of like a Mr. Bean episode.
So we finally got down sort of around Rijeka, which is right up the top of the Gulf, around onto one of the islands where I had to get a ferry across to the island. We didn't have a lot of cash at this point, Croatian cash. So gave them some money, ferry onto the island and down to the island, and got to her uncle. And it turned out we had no idea. So they were displaced from Vukovar, which is right over on the Yugoslav border, Serbian border. So the uncle and his wife and daughter and 2 grandchildren were staying in a hospital which had been turned into a hostel.
Yep.
So we stayed with them for a few days.
Oh, far out.
So during this time, we were watching the news each afternoon, and the Serbians were coming up the coast. They had boats out there, and they were like bombing Dubrovnik and the bombing sort of Split. And they were coming up the coast. We were right up the north, and it was just getting closer and closer. And they were all talking Croatian. I had no idea what was talking, no idea what was on the news. My wife would tell me every night, "Oh, they're up to Dubrovnik. They're coming closer." It's like, what should we do? I think we should get out of here. But there was only like one ferry a week. We couldn't get off off the island. So we were waiting for the ferry. And then I got a little bit crook while we were there as well, and ended up with some sort of stomach ailment. So I was crook, and it was bizarre. It was this hostel, but on this like beautiful Croatian island, crystal clear waters. We could go swimming every day, but they were living on hostel food, and then Serbian army or navy was getting closer and closer and closer, and then we could hear sort of planes at night and all sorts of stuff. And I still remember so clearly this day we were sitting around in they had this tiny little kitchen. They were all in like 2 rooms together. Yeah. So we're there having a cup of tea, and we heard this like an explosion. We thought it was a bomb. So my wife and I, Janet, we jumped under the table. We were hiding under the table. What's going on? And they all started laughing and laughing. And said, what's going on? And they said, USA, USA. And I said, what's going on? The noise was a USA jet fighter pilot or jet plane flying over the top of us and breaking the sound barrier, the sonic boom. Oh, US had just decided then, that day, to basically join the war. They flew in.
Yep.
Jet planes came in and shooed the Serbians away. That was the day they basically saved Croatia. Basically ended the invasion of Croatia.
Jeez. What a way to start your marriage. That's excellent.
We managed to get off the island.
Yeah, shit, if you can survive that, you'll be fine. That's a brilliant story.
Yeah, it was remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, a fascinating time, I think, obviously in that area, the Yugoslavian kind of country or, like the region had been held together for so long. It would have been a fascinating time to be there at that time.
Oh, it was. It was quite amazing.
Yeah.
Quite horrific. There was some terrible stories.
of
cousins lost and all sorts of stuff. But
I mean, a lot of those wounds are still there now, and the way
absolutely.
the countries are still kind of, not really dealing with each other in probably the best manners. But yeah, that's a great story. So that's it, guys. That's it. Us done. So thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
All right, so we're at the end of our interview, so we always ask 2 questions. So first one...
I should listen to the show more often.
Yeah, that's all right. So the first one is, what is something that you think needs to die in our industry? So it could be an idea, a concept, a behavior that you think we need to jettison out of our industry. And you guys can have a go at it each.
I think something that needs to die is the idea that industry has the right to mine. Mm-hmm. And you still see that in conferences where people go, oh, I'm not going to that country because they wouldn't give me a permit that time. And it's like, it's their permit, it's their land. And that's true internally and externally, is that industry doesn't have the right to mine. It's got to be a partnership.
That's a great one.
Yeah. Oh, shit, you put the
pressure is on.
Pressure's on. Plus, he said something really, really, really smart here. What could have to stop? I guess related to, well, I guess it's kind of somehow related, but related to what we are trying to do here is, I've started to work in this kind of field, a bit reluctantly, to be honest. When I remember when Cam tapped on my shoulder saying, do you want to kind of take some project in West Africa? And my vision was, right, I don't want to be part of this because there's too much ugliness happening. So I guess it's a similar kind of thing. It's just that kind of behavior arriving as a neocolonialist who kind of feel like because he's white and being privileged can actually dig out stuff and treat people poorly has to disappear for good. I mean, we have to put the 20th century behind us.
But that applies to researchers.
And that happens to researchers completely. But I guess it's just, it was probably more screaming from an industry point of view.
Yeah, but actually, I mean...
But it is true. You're completely right. It's not only... We can be as bad as anyone else. That's very true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow, those are great ones. So conversely, and the last question, what is something that you think should live in our industry? Something that's fundamental to our DNA that we should never forget?
Geology.
Fieldwork.
Dude. Geology, I think we've run a course recently and that was just coordinated with Nicolas, who's a fantastic geoscientist that most of you guys would know. And one of the things, and he's been very much into, fusion data and working with numerical tools and so on. And one of the messages he said is, these are great tools, but don't forget geology. You need to first be a geologist before being able to apply those tools. So let's not forget geology.
Good one. That's it. Thanks a lot for joining us, guys.
No worries.
Thanks.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
This episode was brought to you by Ahmad Salim and Steve Beresford, produced and edited by Sean Jeffrey, and made possible by the contributions of our many guests. It is their time and energy that really makes this podcast possible. And also, thanks to our listeners. Again, there wouldn't be a podcast if there wasn't anyone listening to it. Happy holidays and stay safe. Exploration Radio is made possible by the support of the AIG, the One-to-One Group and the Assay, and we are an official media partner of the 2023 PDAC conference. Until next time, let's keep exploring.